Chapter 3, Snow. Summary. How afraid were you, Sansa? Back in a city of liars and thieves, with no shield between you and the Lannisters but their contempt. Oh, sweet, darling sister, how afraid were you? How brave were you? They met Jon in the dungeons. He inhaled sharply at the bruise on her face. Taking her chin into his hand, he inspected it closely, angling her face for the light. Sansa bore it as patiently as she could. "I'm sorry," he said, quiet enough that she could barely hear. "What for?" Sansa asked tartly. She couldn't stop thinking of Island Pain and the way his neck had given under the pressure of her sword. If she did, she would scream. If she did, she would not have the strength to leave. So she shoved it down and aside and kept her tone flippant. "A bruise is little enough to pay for freedom. And you have ice, don't you?" "I took some searching, but I found it." "Good. Then we have to leave, don't we?" Jon still looked hesitant, but at the mulish turn to her jaw and steely eyes, he let it go and started leading them into the dungeons. They snuck out and emerged into a small moonlit clearing, a horse tied to a low-lying branch grazing contentedly on the grass. One horse. "Where's the other?" she asked, and though she knew it to be a stupid question, couldn't help but hope that there was another hidden in the brush, wandered away by accident. Jon looked sheepish. "There isn't another. No horse can carry 3 people at once," she said slowly. "Well, what were you thinking, Jon? We have to move fast. We can't do that with a horse loaded down with 3 bodies." Her hands began to shake slightly. "Oh gods, I killed Island Pain. We're going to be caught. I'm going to die." "Nobody's dying," Jon said sharply before Father could speak. "The horse can carry 2 people." "And the third?" He hesitated. After a moment, he gestured to Ghost, who had crept out of the underbrush and now stood beside him, reaching Jon's shoulder, and easily as broad as the horse, it was clear what he wanted. Sansa blanched. "Jon." "You can ride Ghost," he said, eyes pitifully wide. "Please, Sansa? His stride's a bit too rough for Father to take on his leg, and I'm a better horse rider than either of you." No one, Sansa thought spitefully, should be able to pull eyes so large. It's unnatural, is what it is. "Fine," she snapped, and let exasperation paper over her fear. "But you owe me, Jon Snow. You don't even have a saddle." "That difficult, is it?" Sansa tossed her head. "I can handle it, I'm sure. But the only reason for me to do so is because of your lack of planning, which is," she sneered, "unconscionable." "Oh, I'm sorry," he grumbled back, tightening the saddle on the horse and readying to ride. "Should I have just broken into the stables and stolen a Lannister horse? That would definitely have been quiet." "It would have made life much easier," Sansa replied, and then, after a moment's contemplation, managed to drag herself atop Ghost. Jon rolled his eyes. He laced his fingers together to form a step for their father, and after both of them were mounted, he said, "I'm here to protect you, Sansa, not serve you." She exhaled irritably, but before she could answer, Jon dug his heels into the horse's sides and they were off. They didn't stop for another full day. It was past midnight by the time Sansa saw Father swaying in his seat behind Jon. After a few minutes, she hissed Jon's name and signaled a halt. Jon had been leading them through backroads. People would remember a lone girl and 2 men, not to mention the white direwolf accompanying them. The King's Road might have been quicker, but safety was of more importance. That night, Sansa fixed up Ned's leg again. "Rosemary oil again?" he asked wearily, legs stretched out in front of him, back leaning against a tree trunk. Sansa snorted. "I didn't pack the rosemary oil. It doesn't actually do anything." "You slathered my leg in it," he said flatly. "It smells good," she replied quietly, feeling her lips twitch. And I didn't want to be in the Red Keep much, and the only person who I trusted was you, and it gave me an excuse to come sit with you." He frowned heavily. "You didn't trust the Lannisters?" "No." "Why?" It was an honest question, Sansa thought. Her father was curious. And it made sense. He thought she liked the dances and gaiety of the Southern court. For her to be so wary of Joffrey and the other Lannisters didn't make sense. I'll tell you all about it," she said finally. "I told you it was a long story, and it is. But Jon should be here for it. He plays a big part in it, too." "Of course," said Father, and Sansa managed to tack up her lips into a smile. She finished unwrapping the bandages and then stepped away, wrapping an arm around herself and staring into the small, crackling fire in the middle of the clearing. By the time Jon returned, Ned felt a familiar bone-deep exhaustion. Familiar because he remembered Robert's rebellion, and then the Greyjoy one after, the cold earth, the damp cloth, the stink of horses and humans. The tiredness that crept into one's bones and stayed there until one could scarcely remember living without it. "Ghost managed to hunt some rabbits," Jon said, returning to their makeshift camp. "Took his own sweet time doing it, too." Sansa rolled her eyes. "I'm sure you were a paragon of focus as well." "What is that supposed to mean?" Jon asked, sounding injured. She took the rabbits from him along with a knife and began to skin them with remarkable skill. "There's a red stain along your chin. Your sword is still in its scabbard, and you've either gotten a very lumpy chest or you hid something there." She looked up and arched an unimpressed eyebrow. "Did you find some berries, or are you planning on keeping them as a surprise?" "I wanted to give them later," he said, taking out a bag from under his jerkin and tossing it to her. When he stomped across the fire to sit at the opposite end, Sansa seemed to soften. "Don't sulk," she told him. "I was just teasing. And they'll make a nice breakfast tomorrow as well." Jon sighed, but after a moment, he took out another knife and started skinning another rabbit. Both of them looked startlingly used to this banter. Ned wanted to ask when this had happened, this easy camaraderie, this give and take of information. He thought their relationship was fraught with Ned's secrets and lies. He thought that she'd accepted him as a sworn shield for lack of other options. He hadn't expected this long familiar warmth. "Sansa?" he asked, instead of commenting on it. His daughter's shoulders drew tight for a heartbeat. When she turned to fully face him, however, there was nothing of discomfort in her features. "Yes," she said. "I suppose I should tell you now." "I suppose you should," Ned replied, trying not to show impatience. She already looked spooked as it was. "Well," Sansa began, shooting an unreadable look through the fire at Jon, "do you remember that night, Father? When I burst into your rooms?" "The night you told Robb." Ned frowned, reaching for the words. After a moment, he found them. "That he'd be king?" "Yes." I don't think I'll ever forget it. You gave me and your mother quite a fright, and then didn't tell us why you were so distraught." She looked slightly guilty over that, but when she spoke, her voice held none of it. "Well, I had a dream that night. It was very realistic." "A dream of what?" "The future," she said softly. Ned blinked. "The future? What in the hells?" "If you don't wish to tell me," he said sharply, "there's no need to make up fantastic stories." Jon suddenly shifted, purposely drawing attention to himself. Sansa remained still, poised and frozen, but Ned turned to him. "She's not lying," Jon said. "Do you remember us asking who the brother of the Prince of Dorne was? His name? Sansa's the one who told us." "Oberyn," Sansa murmured, blue eyes focused uncannily on Ned's. "That's his name." Ned didn't respond to that. He glanced at Jon and asked, flatly, "Us?" Jon, whose hands hadn't stopped skinning the rabbit, froze. The look he shot at Sansa was apologetic, Ned thought, apologetic, and the same expression he got when he had done some mischief and had to take his lumps, a mixture of resignation, unhappiness, and resolve. "Rob and I," he offered as an explanation. It was all that was needed. "The three of you." Ned began disbelievingly, only to cut himself off and start over again. "The three of you lied to me, to Caitlin, to your brothers and sisters for years." "Would you have believed me?" Sansa asked, and there was iron underneath her sadness. "You'd have had Maester Luwin drug me with milk of poppy, and when I woke up, attempt to convince me I saw nothing. That's the future." "Dreams don't tell the future." "That wasn't a dream," she hissed, and Ned recoiled. They fell silent, all of them. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and rustle of leaves around them. "That wasn't a dream," Sansa repeated, this time weary. "It's never been a dream, Father. It's the truth. It's a hard and terrible truth. It's what will happen if we don't act. We are the Starks of Winterfell. You know what they say of us." Her lips twitched into a wan smile. "Blood doesn't run in our veins. 'Tis honor and duty and love. I did what I had to do so we could survive. I'm not sorry for it." "Then tell me what happens that is so terrifying to you," Ned challenged. Jon suddenly moved his hands, catching onto Sansa's shoulders as he knelt beside her and whispered something into her hair. Had they not been in such a quiet area, Ned might not have heard, but forests tended to swallow ambient noise. He heard everything. "Don't say anything too painful. You've already said more than you have to me or Rob in years. Take it easy, don't push yourself too much." What horrible things had Sansa faced that she didn't speak of them? That she had to control herself so much? That she didn't tell her brothers for years? Through the slowly dawning horror, he saw Sansa lift her chin proudly and turn to him. "They killed you," she told him, and though her voice remained calm, her eyes were averted. "I was betrothed to Joffrey before we left Winterfell. When they arrested you, I begged Joffrey to pardon you. He promised to do so. And then he had Island Pain take your head, just to see me scream. Gods above." Ned's fingers dug into the meat of his thigh, likely bruising it. He could see what she had said so easily, the sun hanging low in the sky, the painful hope of escape by confessing, the grief and loss that came when it was all ripped away. What was a single bruise compared to seeing your own father dead in front of you? Of seeing his beheading? Ned had imagined the death of his father for years, the stink of burning flesh, the way Brandon's face must have twisted, but he'd never had reality to augment it. He was so glad he did not. "Sansa," he said and opened his arms. She hadn't wept when she told him, but when she flung herself at him, he could feel the aborted sobs running through her chest. "Sansa, sweetling, don't you worry, I'm here. You brought us out." I know, she was saying through her own tears. "I was so afraid. Cersei wanted to have the trial with Robb, and when he didn't respond, she looked so angry." "Shoo, hush. It hasn't come to pass. It won't come to pass. I'm right here. I'm sorry, Sansa, darling, I didn't see you and didn't think." Sansa buried her head against his chest, curling against him like slowly unfurling petals. Ned felt a fullness in his chest along with the disbelief, along with the grief. But they were alive, and they were free. Ned could scarcely believe his daughter's stories, but he could also scarcely disbelieve her. Sansa had never been prone to thinking impossible things, for all that he might have believed that of her when she was a child. She had changed after that terrible night. His Sansa had grown, and he couldn't see any lies in her story now. They were alive and they were free. Oh, he'd have questions later, definitely, but he'd take his blessings here, right now, where he found them, and wouldn't look too closely at it. Sansa began to cut layers off her skirts. It was still summer, and the south was warm enough that she didn't need the cloth to keep from feeling chilled. She took a needle and thread from the medicine kit she'd packed for her father, and began to stitch a pair of breeches for herself. If she were to ride Ghost all the way back to Winterfell, it'd make far more sense for her to be able to actually grip his sides rather than hold on and pray that she didn't fall off. Father arched an eyebrow when she emerged one morning with her skirts cut and breeches clearly visible underneath. Jon only laughed at her and told her that if she wasn't careful, she'd become Arya. "Fat chance," she retorted. "I'm burning everything from King's Landing the night we get to Winterfell." Get to Winterfell a month ago, and she wouldn't have been so careless. But the air was growing colder slowly but surely. The earth was becoming mulchy under their feet. The trees were growing taller and wider. Winterfell didn't seem so far now. Lannister men were on their heels, but they were falling further and further behind now that they were in the Riverlands proper. Some nights, Winterfell felt close enough to taste. Jon grinned now, less self-conscious and more relieved. Proximity to Winterfell was having a good influence on all of them. "You light the bonfire, but I'm going to burn that red cloak," he said, gesturing to the dirt-stained travesty their father kept wrapped up in a bundle underneath the saddle. Father shook his head. "If anyone's got a claim to that thing, it's me. You burn that damned awful jerkin, Jon. It looks horrible on you." "This one?" he asked, looking down at it. "It's fine." It had started as a shade of deep gold slashed with black. Weeks of riding and roughing it had managed to turn it the shade of vomit, with liberal blood and dirt interspersed throughout. "That," Sansa told him, "is such a lie you ought to be ashamed of yourself." It felt nice to see Father actually laughing and speaking. There had been a few days when she'd worried, because his face had been so gray and he'd looked so exhausted. His leg must have been bothering him more than she'd expected. But now he looked healthier, and a week ago, when she'd fallen asleep holding onto Ghost and promptly been dumped into a stream, he'd laughed and laughed, hard enough that Jon had looked torn between which one to help, the water-soaked girl who still looked bleary, or the madman who'd gone purple. It was nice. A buoyancy that sank into her gut, getting lighter with every passing day. There are no words for this, thought Sansa. There are no words for this kind of love or for this kind of happiness. This is my strength. This is my weakness. These are my flaws, but this is what my spine is made of. Sansa awoke from a dream, eyes catching and holding Jon's. "Arya's home," she breathed, and he wanted to ask her how she knew, but there was such fevered joy in her eyes that all he could do was reach out and grip her hand tightly. "So will we," he said. "Soon, Sansa, soon." When they crested the neck, Sansa gathered the moss of blue-veined trees and began the tedious process of washing the dye from her hair. Father looked startled to think that she had purposely hidden herself in such a manner, but Jon only looked relieved that it would be back to normal. The morning she awoke with hair a familiar shade of sunset red, her father told her that he'd never before thought anyone else could have hair that color. "When I first met your mother, her hair was unbound," he told Sansa quietly. It was early morning, and Jon was still asleep. He was the one who worked the hardest, the longest. Neither of them begrudged him his rest. I'd never before seen hair that color. It was like someone had taken the weirwood leaves and woven them into hair. He sighed. Over the years, it's darkened, and Robb, Bran, and Rickon might have her coloring, but their hair's always been darker than Catelyn's ever was. I thought you'd go the same route for many years, too." "Rather noticeable," she commented, fingering the still damp strands. "I mean, I didn't want to be, in King's Landing. But I've had red hair far longer than I've ever had brown. It's nice to feel normal again." He nodded slowly, and they sank into a comfortable silence once more. Jon had a number of reasons for walking into the cave. There was a storm coming. They could feel the electric heaviness in the air even now, and so they had decided to hunker down in a nearby cave instead of trying to outrun it. Their horse had started limping, and so Father had been looking over him, Sansa had murmured something about her hair and readying the cave and gone there, while Jon had gone to fetch firewood. Usually, he took his time gathering the wood. Usually, he let the pressures and tensions of the day fade a little when he was alone for the firewood. As a result, he tended to take a little longer than necessary to do the job, even if it wasn't entirely noticeable to anyone else. But today there was a storm, and Jon was exhausted enough that all he wanted was to sleep. So he looked for dry wood quickly and headed back just as fast, looking forward to a quiet night. What he didn't expect was for Sansa to be stripped down to her shift, hair spilling over her shoulders as she washed up. Jon jumped and the firewood in his hands clattered to the floor, making Sansa whirl around and shriek loudly. He immediately averted his eyes and looked to the entrance. He stammered, and then managed to sidle out before things got any worse. He wasn't sure how it could get worse, but his cheeks were hot enough to light braziers already. He didn't want to imagine what could happen if it was even more embarrassing. By the time their father returned from tending to the horse, thankfully, it hadn't thrown a shoe, but only had a thorn in its hoof. He was standing outside the cave, feeling more like a sentry than any sworn shield. "Something happened?" he asked. Jon immediately flushed. "No," he said, and wished it didn't sound so strained. "But it might be better if we wait outside for a couple of minutes." Father sent him a quizzical look, but it seemed that he'd adopted a policy of not asking after the numerous changes to his children so long as he could pretend he wasn't seeing it. It was a relief for both of them. A few minutes later, Sansa called them to enter. She'd already lit a fire, and her face looked suspiciously pink in the firelight when she looked at him. In the dim light, Jon couldn't help but remember the way water damped her shift, making it cling to her hips. "She is your sister," he thought, and closed his eyes firmly. "Do you remember old man stories of wargs?" Sansa asked one night when she couldn't sleep and Jon remained awake. "Aye," he said, stirring the fire. "Men who can see through the eyes of animals. She sang some long story of Baal, the bard being one, didn't she?" Sansa swallowed hard. "Skin changers," she whispered. "It's said to be in the blood of the first men, and that is who we are." "Sansa." "I dream of Lady," she said clearly, calmly, showing nothing of her racing heart. "Not of Lady, not exactly. That I am Lady. I am her, and she is me, and there is nothing that can separate us. But death." The whisper seemed to coil up the base of her skull like a fanged snake. Sansa wanted to shiver and ache, but all she did was stare into the glowing depths of the fire. "You think you're a warg?" "That I am? That we all are?" Jon looked startled. His dark eyes swallowed the light, and the deer planes of his face seemed hard and foreign in the darkness. "I thought they were just dreams," he said finally, after a long pause. "Oh, thank the gods," Sansa replied, feeling tears sting at the corners of her eyes. Relief at not being alone any longer. "So I'm not alone." He looked up, and there was a promise in his eyes that made heat uncurl in the hollows of her chest. "Never," he murmured, and if it made Sansa a fool to believe him, she thought she'd take the insult gladly. They were just past Moat Cailin when Ned heard the distinctive sound of hoofbeats. Jon immediately pulled their horse to the side and Sansa crouched low on Ghost's back. The direwolf snuck into the shadows, and in a matter of moments it was as if nobody had been there to begin with. They were all getting practice at this. But this time, they were past the neck. They were supposed to be safe. How could Lannister forces invade the north without starting a war? Ned looked upwards, peering through the darkness, only to identify the riders as markless. Mercenaries. Not Lannister men, not any lord's men, just men with steel in their fists and a desire for blood, willing to kill and fight for gold. He frowned and looked closer. There was something there, like a drum just slightly out of beat with 10 others, a dissonance only visible if one knew to look for it. There was something there, and Ned knew there was something there. He just didn't know what. The riders left after a few moments milling about, presumably to take the King's Road. That night, Ned didn't dream of Winterfell or Catelyn or his children. He didn't dream about King's Landing or Lyanna or Harrenhal. He didn't dream about Brandon or his father or even the 2 rebellions he had served in. No. Ned dreamt that he was back in the Vale, an awkward, stern, friendless boy sent to live under a man to whom honor was of paramount importance. In the dream, Robert was young and beardless, and his blue eyes gleamed like silver rust. Ned was in his room, sulking and terrified of stepping outside. He'd seen Robert enter the gates of the Eyrie that morning but hadn't gone down to see him. And then his door had burst open under the immense strain of Robert Baratheon, all his magnificent aura spent trying to make friends of Ned, and there had been no going back to his quiet, airy little life. Robert dragged him to a joust that Ned was definitely not interested in, and forced him to sit through hours of explanations and monologues on the inanities of horseflesh, and Ned finally started to ignore Robert in favor of the blue and gray armor, shod Vale men. "Some men aren't knights but wish to compete," Robert said in Ned's dream, voice suddenly calm and contemplative. "Those wear no armor, but you can see their reins, can't you, Ned? That's gonna be blue. Or gray. If we were back at Storm's End, they'd be black and yellow. They say the Targaryens used to dip their reins in blood to make them red." Blue reins, thought Ned, and awoke with a gasp. Those riders from that morning had reins a pale blue, as if frosted roses had fallen on the leather accidentally and stained it. What do Vale mercenaries wish to do in the north? There was a low-lying hill that extended straight out of the Wolfswood. From it, one could see the tips of Winterfell's turrets, and if it was a clear day, the fluttering banners as well. Jon felt his heart clench when he saw the pale flags pulling taut against the wind. "Winterfell," Sansa whispered. "Oh, Jon, look." "Here," said their father. "Yes," replied Jon. "Yes. Come on, we can reach by tonight if we hurry." None of them were in shape to stop riding after that. The sun was still high in the sky when they rode in, hooves thundering. Jon tried to pull up to declare who they were to the guards on the turrets, but Sansa wasn't having any of it. She ducked her head, murmured something into Ghost's ear, and then they were off like a shot, a blur of white fur and red hair. Jon cursed under his breath, echoed by their father's amused chuckle, and dug his heels into the horses' sides. They entered the courtyard a heartbeat after Sansa, only to find it frozen. Sansa stood in the middle, and among the cold gray stones, her hair, loose around her shoulders, stood out like a banner. One hand was pressed to her mouth, and the other was knotted in ghost fur, as if it was the only thing holding her up. Robb stood in the middle of the courtyard, just as still and stunned as everyone else. He looked broader, Jon thought distantly. Broader, stronger, steel in his jaw and a strength that hadn't been there when they'd left. He held a wooden sword in his hand that drooped as if he'd forgotten it. To move was to break a tableau, a dream, a hope. And then Sansa, brave Sansa, let go of Ghost, straightened, and began to move forward. It was all that was needed for Robb to lunge forwards, hands dropping the sword and coming up to cradle her. The choked cry that came from his lips hurt Jon's chest. Sansa dug her hands into his shoulders and stretched to whisper something in his ear. Robb gave a shuddering sigh, and some cold stiffness faded from his tense shoulders. A moment later, the men were shouting for Bran and Arya and Lady Catelyn. Everything dissolved then. Jon wasn't entirely sure when the others became aware of their presence, but he did remember some things clearly. Arya's arms tightening against his chest, Robb choking on words as they embraced, the staggering, lanky weight of Bran wrapping around him. When Lady Catelyn appeared at the door, she looked pale with shock. Upon seeing Sansa, she almost collapsed, barely catching herself against the stone wall. Sansa must have seen her mother through some unknown mechanism. She slipped past both Bran and Robb and hugged her on the front steps of the keep. That close, she looked almost as tall as her mother, No, taller. Then Lady Catelyn looked past Sansa's shoulder and saw her husband. Her face twisted, flicking through the emotions almost quicker than Jon could follow. Shock, then hope, finally settling on something almost too intimate for everyone's eyes. Before Jon could decide how to react, they were in each other's arms, kissing more tenderly than Jon could have imagined. It was all terribly embarrassing. Robb looked as if he agreed. His cheeks were a tad too red to be accounted for with excitement or exercise. While his parents looked lost in each other, he took charge with an ease that hadn't been there before. He ushered them inside and told the servants to leave their lord and lady alone for as long as necessary. Once that was over, Robb led them not to the Great Hall, as Jon had half thought he might. Instead, he took them to his chambers, and all those who could fit piled onto the bed. Sansa and Robb took the chairs. When the food arrived, not 5 minutes later, Jon felt he was almost back in his childhood, all of them awaiting one of Sansa's and Robb's reenactments of the old songs, eating their way through food despite knowing they'd be scolded for it in the morning, and above all, warm. Robb sighed. He spoke haltingly, and the way he picked at his food told Jon that he was more relieved than anything Robb could have said. He'd always had a habit of it, no matter how much his mother tried to stop him. "The Lannisters got angry," he said, "almost 4 months ago. The letters that you'd been writing stopped, and then 2 of them came, but they were from a maester's hands. I was worried, so worried, and then Arya came home and told us Jon returned to save Sansa, but nobody said a word. There." "The Lannisters didn't send anything official," Arya interrupted. For a heartbeat, she looked furious for all her Stark features. For just a heartbeat, she looked like her mother reborn. "But there were rumors, and last week, a woman came out of nowhere and tried to pretend to be Sansa." Sansa went cold and quiet, and very carefully placed her hands flat on her lap. She swallowed and then looked up, straight into Robb's eyes. "Tell me you chased her out of Winterfell," she said. "Didn't let her stay the night," Robb replied, a nasty light in his eyes. Jon waited and was rewarded with Robb's smirking finish. "Arya chased the Lannister wench out of Winterfell with Lady and Nymeria beside her. I don't think she'll stop running until she's well short of the neck." "Thank you," Sansa told Arya. Arya looked startled. It had probably been ages since Sansa had said something so meaningful to her sister. To stop their fights, Sansa had stopped talking to her as extensively as she once used to. To be faced with something so meant from Sansa must have been an entirely new experience for Arya. Hopefully Arya's grown up a little since I left her, Jon thought. But when Sansa turned to talk to Robb, Arya only frowned thoughtfully into her plate. A thinking Arya is a dangerous Arya. Robb sighed and gestured a little wildly. "There were other rumors too, you know. About a noble-born girl being taken by Vale soldiers, about another being caught in the Westerlands. You took your own sweet time getting here." "We had to keep it quiet," Sansa replied. Color was still high in her cheeks, and she looked startlingly beautiful with it. The candlelight shone off her unbound hair. She resembled the oldest statues in the crypts, Jon thought, all lovely skin and steady, unshaking features. "We couldn't take the King's Road, and the Lannisters probably don't want it to be known that a 14-year-old girl and her injured father can escape from King's Landing without anyone stopping them." "How is father's leg?" "Not so bad as expected." She shrugged. "It looked worse than it was when I got father out of the cells, and I spent more than a month making sure he got better. And nobody thought I could lie either, so they believed me when I cried about the pus." "Oh yes," drawled Arya. "Prissy little Sansa crying about the yellow stuff in father's leg. However, did you live?" Sansa faltered, for the first time that night. "We can't handle this tonight," Jon thought, and spoke before she could make Arya even more suspicious. "By being smart and keeping her head down," he said mildly, and then Robb rolled his eyes and Bran started chattering about a gargoyle on the 3rd floor, and the strange tension between Sansa and Arya snapped. All Jon could think was that he was warm, that the cold lump in his belly was gone, that his chest was tight and hot with something he didn't dare name. Sansa was happy. They were home. They were safe, and Jon had brought them here, and he had done his job. When he fell asleep at the table, nobody even looked surprised. Robb was in the Godswood the next morning, far before anyone had awoken. He was in the middle of praying when the quiet, padding snuffles reached his ears. He turned around to see Sansa picking her way through the leaves, with Lady and Grey Wind beside her. She sat on a flat stone next to him. She didn't say anything, though, and Robb turned back to the tree and continued his praying. When he was done, he turned to her and gripped her hands tightly. "I was afraid," he confessed hoarsely. There were no words for his guilt, for the way he'd felt when he read that first letter from Sansa that told him to come to King's Landing, a terrible mixture of anger, of guilt, of fear. Then whispers had come from the south that they'd escaped, and the rumors that came after had nearly made him weep. But she was here, now. The Starks were home, and they were behind Winterfell's walls, and they were safe. And if there were no words for his feeling when she left, there were even fewer for how he'd felt to see a flame-haired queen ride into Winterfell on a white direwolf. "I know," Sansa replied, her pale hand covering his own. "I was too. There were nights when I was sure they'd catch us and drag us back to King's Landing." They sank back, retreating into quiet contemplation until Robb asked, "You couldn't sleep? Tonight, I mean?" She hesitated, and then seemed to collapse on herself, all thin bones and skinny, coltish elegance. "I wanted to see Lady. And then I couldn't sleep, and I didn't want to disturb Jon. He slept for a full night for the first time in months, so I decided to come to the Godswood." Robb breathed in, breathed out, and looked away. "I'm sorry I wasn't there in King's Landing." Sansa's breath hitched, and then her hand came under his chin and lifted it roughly, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not," she said sharply. "I'm not sorry at all. They tried to kill Father. They did kill Jory. And I need to talk to you about that, so remind me later. But the point is that the only reason Jon survived was because I sent him away, and they didn't expect me to be anything. It was the only way it'd work. I knew that. I just didn't think, maybe if I'd done something I could have saved Jory. I could have saved Septa Mordain. But I didn't. I couldn't. And if you'd been there and you died, I wouldn't have been able to bear it. So you'll be glad you stayed, Robb, or you'll stab me with your needles?" "I'll take Arya's," she snapped, and the rush of relief that came with having someone who treated him like he was an idiot almost bowled him over. "We have to tell the others," Robb told her, leaning back against the stone, closing his eyes and basking in the sun. "Arya's thinking, and we all know how dangerous that is. And Mother isn't stupid either." She snorted, undignified. "I told Father on the way here. He didn't take it well at first. And then he believed me, I think." Sansa paused, sounding testy. "We were all quite tired, you know, and nobody's in the best of moods to be having long conversations while on the run." He didn't open his eyes or turn to meet hers. "But now you have to tell both Mother and everyone else. So how do we do it?" "I don't know. Does it matter?" The words themselves weren't alarming, her tone was. It started sharply and ended on a thin, bitten-off sob. The ruthless way she controlled her body so it was still only worried him further. When he looked up at her, she had a hand pressed to her mouth as if to keep her secrets inside, and there was such pain and slow-building horror that Robb's chest ached as if she'd struck him with a sword. "Sansa," he whispered. She said so softly he could scarcely hear her. I thought..." But she didn't finish. Only buried her head in her pale hands, her red hair spilling out like blood, and began to shake like a sapling in a sea storm. "They beat me," she'd said once. "They took Father's head to hear my screams." "How afraid were you, Sansa?" Back in a city of liars and thieves, with no shield between you and the Lannisters but their contempt. Oh, sweet, darling sister, how afraid were you? How brave were you? Come here, he told her, and then he was holding her, feeling tears soak his collar. That was how they spent the morning, through the cold wind and steadily brightening sky, Robb keeping her grounded in the world and as warm as he could manage. Sansa, though she stopped trying, shook and trembled like a leaf. After some time, she whispered, I thought I'd be normal. Now that I'm back. But it's only. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. I just want it over. And you will, Robb swore. I'll march south and every last person who dared to frighten you will beg for mercy, Sansa. I'll tear their necks open if they don't. She pressed her wrist to her eyes, rubbing away the tears. Robb waited for her to finish. Slowly, she looked back at him. If I sleep, she said, voice small like he'd never heard before, I see Father's head. And I can't. I'll wake up screaming if I do. Then you wake up screaming, Robb replied. And I'll be there. Jon'll be there. Mother, Arya, Bran, Father, someone will be there and will hold you and will remind you that you are a Stark of Winterfell inside Winterfell, and while you've seen horrors and you've survived them, you're not there anymore. The look in Sansa's eyes couldn't be captured in words. Something of hope, and another part of love, and another of relief, but mostly, under it all, a steely, quiet sort of strength that was unique to Sansa. Yes, please, she said and closed her eyes as if too tired to keep them open any longer. Thank you, Robb. It was the day after the feast that Jon managed to sit and speak with Arya. Before talking, however, they sparred, Jon against Arya, wooden swords clacking and scraping against each other, her twists against his strength. It put her in a good mood, and Jon wasn't above using that for the conversation. So he said, half panting and sweaty, you've gotten better. Mother's not making me embroider anymore, Arya replied, and Robb's been training me. Said something about me being safe, or some such rot. She smirked. He's slower than you. Stronger too. Makes him easier to beat. Jon sighed. You do need to keep your guard up, though. You tend to get lost in attacking if you think you can get away with it. Usually I can, she pointed out. And the one time you can't, you'll get a sword to your throat. She sent him a flat, unamused look, and he offered her a grin, all sharp edges and teeth. I know I didn't seem happy last night, she said suddenly. You seemed plenty happy, Jon replied after a beat, making sure she could see him rubbing his ribs ostentatiously. I've got a bunch of bruises, you know, from all you Starks and your happiness. You hugged too tight. Arya bit her lip, ignoring him. I mean, I didn't mean to hurt Sansa's feelings last night. It was just habit, you know. Her lips twisted dryly, teasing her. But she just looked really sad. Jon knelt, one hand resting on Arya's shoulder and the other still clutching the hilt of the practice sword. Sansa's done things that you haven't. She's faced things you can't imagine. Arya looked away, as if ashamed at his words, and he continued quickly. She's been hurt and afraid for a very long time. It was better on the road, but, well, if you were being chased by Lannisters and all you had was your bastard brother and injured father beside you against the full might of the Westerlands, how would you have felt? Her cheeks lifted slightly. You're saying she's adjusting. I'm saying that your sister isn't normal, Jon replied. Maybe she won't be for a long time. Maybe not forever. But she loves you, Arya. She understands what you wanted to do. Sansa was shaken when she arrived, but she understands that you weren't being purposely mean. Or I hope she does. So because I didn't mean to hurt her, Arya challenged, it doesn't matter? It doesn't matter, he said firmly. It matters a lot. But she's forgiving you for it. I think if either of you had thought this kind of thing was unforgivable, you'd have killed each other before you turned 5, no matter how much Father tried to separate you." Arya glared at the floor. "I didn't mean to hurt her. And she's been really nice after that. This morning at breakfast, she didn't mention anything from last night to Mother or Father. She actually told me to come here, that she'd cover for me. It just seems, unfair." "Sansa's grown up," he murmured, abruptly amused. "She's acting mature, and this irritates you." "Exactly," she burst out. "I just want her to yell at me. I want her to act like I killed her direwolf. I want her to be the Sansa I knew." Her voice broke slightly, and Jon wanted to hug his sister, hold on to this slight, aching sign of her childhood. But she's just not. "I know what this is. I lived this for so long." What happens when you've lived your entire life in someone's shadow, when you've fought to escape it for so long, and then you come back, and when you try to measure up against it, the shadow itself has changed? He sighed and pressed his hand heavily against her shoulder. "Sansa's done things that you haven't, but that doesn't mean that you haven't done and seen things either, Arya. You came home alone, all the way from the Neck. It's a long journey, it's a dangerous journey. And you made it home safely. You two are different. There are things she is and has, things you are and have, and they're not the same, but that doesn't make one of you lesser. Do you understand?" "Yes." Arya swallowed, and then looked away, and mumbled something so low he couldn't hear. "What was that?" "I killed someone," Arya whispered, face still averted. He tried to kidnap me. When I was asleep, Nymeria and Lady were hunting. By the time they knew what was going on, I just stuck him. With a needle. I was so frightened, and I had blood all over my hands, and I couldn't even wash it off for a full day, but I killed someone." She lifted her chin then, and met his gaze steadily. "Nobody knows but you." "Not even Robb? Not Lady Catelyn?" "You should tell Sansa," he said. Arya jerked. Jon went on. "It isn't my story to tell. But she'll talk to you, I swear. And there's more that you ought to know, but this is the first." Quickly, sharply, he took her chin into his hand and looked straight into her eyes. "Nobody will ever hold defending yourself against you. It's hard, killing someone. I never wish that knowledge, that burden, on anyone. But this is a hard world, Arya, and to survive we have to do things we don't like. Just don't bear it alone." She nodded, and then they went back to sparring, and that was that. Renly and Stannis called their banners, Ned told Robb grimly. Sending the letter had been the first thing he did when he came to Winterfell, after kissing his wife thoroughly, having Maester Luwin check on his leg, and eating dinner. It declared the illegitimacy of Joffrey Baratheon and his siblings, along with the information on where and how he'd confirmed his suspicions. "When?" "Only a few weeks previous, I believe." Ned sighed. "I know we decided to keep Sansa and my arrival quiet, but I had to send the Raven to Stannis. He's not the kind to let anyone know, though. He's kept the news quiet enough." Robb shrugged. "I trust you know Stannis better than I ever will. Are they marching on King's Landing?" Ned felt his lips pull into a deep frown. "No, they called their banners but perhaps it would be more accurate to say that Renly called his banners to his name, and Stannis to his. Renly besieged Dragonstone yesterday." "What?" Robb asked, looking flabbergasted. "Why?" "Renly wants to be king. Truth be told, he'd make a better one than Stannis. But Stannis is ahead of him in the line of succession." "It still doesn't make sense," Robb said, shook his head and pulled himself together. "I mean, why? Not just the siege, but the timing. Why wait so long?" Ned scrubbed a hand through his hair. "When Robert lay dying, Renly told me to take control of Joffrey. I refused, and he fled with a Tyrell knight to Highgarden. I'd written a letter to Stannis, but didn't send it off with a raven. I went to get the city's guard and arrest the Lannisters, and they appeared amenable until Cersei Lannister told them that to raise swords against their queen was treason. They believed her and turned on me, and I was the one arrested. So Renly's been trying to get Stannis to believe him that Joffrey Baratheon is actually Joffrey Lannister, all the way from Highgarden, with nobody to corroborate his story. Stannis doesn't trust his own brother? Stannis wouldn't trust the sun to rise in the east if Renly told him so, Ned said flatly. Sansa said something similar happened last time, Robb said slowly. She said it was called the War of Four Kings, or something like that. Last time? It jarred, still, unpleasantly, to be faced with the idea of traveling through time. But Ned had accepted it, hadn't he? Ned had accepted the idea. It was his turn to hold to it. I need to tell you exactly what she thinks we should do, along with what happened last time, Robb grimaced. Why isn't Sansa telling me herself? She doesn't like to think on it, he replied. It's a long story and a lot of it is bloody. So sit down, I guess? Ned arched an eyebrow suspiciously. In his experience, all three of them had a horrible propensity to understate the difficulties of the past. Perhaps none worse than Robb, who had spent a long time hearing the effects of certain people's actions, but never actually experiencing any of them. If Robb was actually admitting to the story being bloody, then it was going to be nightmare-inducing. He sat down and braced himself. In a few weeks, Robb said, eyes gleaming and back straight as a ruler, we shall call our banners and ride south. We will raise the Westerlands to the ground, take King's Landing, and then we will melt down the Iron Throne. Here is how. Gods above, thought Ned, and of all things it was pride that swelled in his chest as he listened. I killed someone, Arya whispered, and Sansa felt her heart lurch like a matchstick boat on a stormy sea. She could have said 1,000 things. But Sansa saw the way her little sister's ribs curved inwards, as if hollow and empty, and let all those things die on the tip of her tongue. I did too, she replied, and then they were in each other's arms, and if it wasn't perfect, Arya was too short, too skinny, too hard, and too different from Sansa. It was happy, and Sansa had learned enough to know that this was precious. She's tired, Robb said quietly. Jon frowned. Tired? And angry and sad, and I'm pretty sure she hasn't had a full night's sleep since you left King's Landing. Probably not since she left Winterfell either. Robb sighed and rested his head on his hand, elbow pressed against the desk. She said as much in the Godswood this morning. Jon looked at the window. A muscle flexed slowly in his jaw. She hasn't said anything to me, he said finally. Not anything? Robb asked, startled. She could have just... Not anything. Sore topic? Robb almost asked, but thought better of it. Then you can now consider yourself informed, he said instead crisply. Jon's face looked hard and unyielding. Robb rolled his eyes and rubbed a hand over his eyes. Jon was never more melodramatic than when he felt people didn't pay attention to him. It looked scary, perhaps, but Robb knew better than to offer him a helping hand while he sulked. More than that, he just returned from talking to their father, and had only a few hours to rest before he had to start training some of the younger boys in the yard. By rest, he thought mournfully, I mean paperwork. Fucking paperwork. A moment later, he felt a yawn start to rise in his throat. Robb tried to suppress it. He failed and instead managed to puff out his cheeks like a beaver. Jon let out a slightly stiff laugh and Robb glared at him. Shut up, you idiot. You went south and became a goddamn glorified guard and left me here to deal with the paperwork. You know how many nights I've slept less than 5 hours? You know how many nights I've slept less than that? Jon retorted. I barely slept more than 3 hours on the way to King's Landing after leaving Arya at the Neck, and on the way back with Sansa and Father, it was only slightly better. You've nothing to complain about. Robb rolled his eyes again. Jon braced himself against the desk and reached for some papers. After Robb nodded, there was nothing confidential there. He began to read them aloud. "Marriage offer," he said, flipping through the papers quickly. "Tax clarification. Death notice. Marriage offer. Marriage offer. Oath of fealty. Marriage offer. Grain allocation. Maria, how many marriage offers did you get while I was gone?" Robb took one look at the incredulous look in his eyes and felt a laugh bubble up. "This is all from the last month alone. Turns out people want to marry the heir to Winterfell. Who knew?" "Who knew?" Jon mimicked. "Who knew? Oh, it's so difficult for me. I'm the heir to the north. All the girls in 7 kingdoms want to fall at my feet. Get in my bed. Bear my children." Jon shook his head and tossed the papers back onto the desk. His levity faded as he looked straight at him. "Robb, why am I here?" "Because I thought you'd know how Sansa was doing," Robb told him bluntly. Robb knew how he thought she was doing, and it was quite clear to him that Sansa was holding on to composure by threads that were snapping by the day, if not the hour. Already she'd lost herself in the Godswood to exhaustion. But Jon had said something of a red cloak and blood and death the previous night, right before the feast, and Robb was fairly certain that had Sansa actually killed someone, it would spell a bigger, louder, and ultimately more damaging reaction than any she had had so far. "She seemed fine," he said at last, almost unwillingly. "Sansa didn't say anything about being worried to me. On the road, she wasn't normal, but who would be after going through what she did?" Robb frowned. "I'm worried about her. She was so brave, you know, in King's Landing. The Lannisters made her write letters to me, and I'm pretty sure they were telling her what to write, so she used that code we made up a couple of years ago. Do you remember?" "I think so. Left-leaning is truth, right-leaning false, or something like that." "Close enough, just the opposite." Robb dug through the paperwork and plucked a letter from Sansa, spreading it on the table to make it easier to see. "When her letters lean to the right, they're true. When they lean to the left, they're a lie. So you can see that when she says her hair is getting darker, it's a lie, but here she says father is okay, and she isn't." "Robb, I know that Sansa's brave. I was there, in King's Landing." Jon's eyes narrowed on his. "Why are you acting like this?" "What do you mean?" "Don't play coy," Jon said sharply. "Why are you showing me all this?" "Tell him the truth," said a voice that sounded remarkably like Sansa. "Lies will only hurt him worse." "Because Sansa didn't tell you that she was terrified," Robb said slowly. "She tells you things she doesn't tell me. She trusts you in ways that she doesn't trust me. And she doesn't in this, and I want to make sure that you don't go charging after her, demanding why." Jon reached forward and traced her looping signature with a single finger. His head was bowed. Robb could see the way the muscles in his shoulders bunched and twisted angrily. "I'm not a fool," he said lowly. Robb shook his head. "Right now, you're angry at her. Anger only ever makes Sansa defensive. If you confront her, she's not going to answer you. I want you to know that before you tell her anything." Jon's eyes flicked upwards, meeting Robb's. His face was flushed a deep red. It was so strange, Robb thought. When he was angry, he looked nothing like their father. There was something sharp and alien and hungry in those familiar features instead, a fierce rage that burned too hot for his cold face. "I don't need you to interfere," he snapped. "I don't want you to interfere. I'll talk to Sansa whenever I damn well please. Our relationship isn't something you have control over. I know that you find it difficult when there's nothing for you to do, but here's a bit of advice that I strongly suggest you take before I punch your nose in. Deal with it." "Good advice," Robb said. Jon's eyes became even angrier, and he raised his hands defensively. Fine. I'm shutting up now." Jon continued to glare at him angrily, and that uncomfortable position might have gone on for even longer had a serving maid not knocked on the door and stuck her head in. "Pardon, milord," she said. but you said to tell you if we heard noise in front of Lady Sansa's rooms. Well, that is to say. Spit it out, Jon advised. She breathed in sharply. She's screaming, my lord. She's screaming. Sansa's screaming. Robb had stood up almost before he knew it, but then Jon pressed a heavy hand to his shoulder and moved to follow the girl. I'm going, he said defiantly, and then disappeared behind the door, going to Sansa's rooms quickly. Robb swallowed hard. He sank back onto the chair and scrubbed a hand over his face wearily. This is the burden of being heir, his father had said once when Robb complained about being so strictly controlled while Bran and Jon got to run around so freely. I'm sorry, Robb, but this is something given to you, and it is a painful responsibility, but it must be borne. This is the burden of power, Robb thought now. He sighed, sent up a curse to the gods, and bent over his paperwork. Sansa woke up, throat raw. The room was empty, but Sansa heard rough movements outside her door, and then the low murmur of voices. She closed her eyes and tried desperately to will herself back to slumber when the door opened and Jon strode in. Robb explained, he said shortly, and threw himself into the seat beside her bed. Sansa eyed him warily, and the irritation bled out of him slowly. Why didn't you say anything to me? I was tired, she murmured, leaning against her pillows once more. And you were sleeping. I didn't want to disturb you. I'm your sworn shield. Not my servant. Yes, I know, and some duties are yours and duties that aren't. This isn't one of them. Jon just looked at her, grimly. When she didn't respond, he huffed exasperatedly. Fine. If you don't want to talk about it, I won't make you. But we will, later. Sansa resisted the urge to roll her eyes. And what do you want to talk about now? You need to sleep right now, he told her. We will talk, though, later. She reached out and gripped his hand, feeling the warmth and calluses along his fingers. It sent a low jolt through her, as if lightning had struck the space between the two of them. But then her eyes were slipping closed and the world felt very distant, and before she could speak or even consider what that meant, she was asleep. They told their family in the Godswood. Jon and Robb flanked Sansa as she spoke her part. When she finished, Robb took over. He told them partially of their plans for the future, of what they intended to achieve. It was a tall tale, a long one, to weave things of the past, things of the present, all coming together in a gamble Sansa had thrown for the future. It was the aftermath that surprised everyone, though. Father came and stood beside Sansa, hand warm on her shoulder, and said, "It's true," and not a single soul in all the realms would have doubted a man who spoke with that tone of surety and confidence. Certainly no Stark did that night. A week later, Sansa was walking in the courtyard, trying to work up the courage to tell Jon why she hadn't told him everything, when the vibration of horse hooves sounded. People turned to see, and Sansa felt her heart quicken at the sight of pale blue banners and falcons. A heartbeat later, when Peter Baelish landed in the courtyard of Winterfell, done up in grey-blue finery, her blood turned to ice. She clutched Jon's arm and turned him, so she was hidden from view. "He can't see me," she hissed up at him, and flipped up the hood on her cloak. "Don't let him see me, whatever else happens." Her mother stepped forward, out of the crowd. Her hair was in a neat braid down her back, and Sansa was sure she'd never before seen a lady so unsuited for the North being so comfortable in its confines. Though she looked confused, her tone remained courteous. "What purpose do knights from the Vale of Arryn have in Winterfell?" "We come to pledge to you," Peter responded with a grand bow. Her mother squinted, frowning, and then recognition flooded across her face. When she stepped forward to embrace him, quickly, Sansa felt her hands tighten convulsively, one of them gripping Jon's bicep tight enough to bruise. "Where's Robb?" she whispered. Jon shot her a slightly wary look. "Inside," Why? Go get him. I thought you said. It doesn't matter what I said. Get Rob. Fast. Tell him to be a distraction. When he only frowned, she snapped, Now, John! All right. Just don't do anything stupid. Sansa shot him a freezing look, and John paled slightly. I'm going. She turned back just in time to see her mother step back from embracing Peter. A younger, more innocent Sansa might have only seen the laughter and love in her mother's eyes, the warmth that she offered to Peter, but the older one saw not only Lady Catelyn's regard, but also Peter's response, grasping, all-consuming, violent greed. I married your sister a few weeks ago, Peter was saying. Lisa wished you to be there, I know, but it was so fast there was barely anyone. He wanted to see jealousy in her mother's eyes. But Sansa could only see laughter and relief in them, could only see sweet love. Oh, at least she's moving past Jon Arryn's death, she said. I worried for her, you know. So far from home, the sky is no place for a fish. Neither is the ice, Peter said slyly. Sansa inhaled sharply. She wanted to growl, or snarl, or shout. Something because she knew Peter. She knew the way he used words as knives and crafted rivalry where there was once love, hatred where once there was respect. She knew the way he looked when he was plotting. But her mother didn't respond to anything like that with either defensive words or anger. Instead of taking offense, she only threw her head back and laughed. Don't you know, Peter? She asked. I am no Southron fish any longer. I am the mother of wolves and the Lady of Winterfell. When Ned left for King's Landing, I even went to pray in the Godswood. If the girl from Riverrun had known what I would become, I'd have been horrified. Peter's amusement faded into something ugly and dark before disappearing behind a mask of sadness. Sansa frowned. Of course, he murmured. I meant to speak to you, Cat. I'm afraid I bring terrible news with me. She cocked her head to the side. Terrible news? A few weeks ago, we came across the body of a girl and a man in the Vale. Their throats were slit by men from the High Clans. He shuddered slightly, the girl's body. I'm sorry to say this, Cat. I'm so sorry. Peter, her mother began, sounding horrified. Peter continued, as if lost in numb shock. Sansa thought, uncharitably, that he had never before resembled a pickled frog as when trying to convey compassion. She looks so much like you. As soon as I saw her, knew I had to come. Gods, Cat, I know you never wished it to be like this. What? Your daughter, Sansa of the House Stark, and your husband, Lord Eddard Stark, are dead, he said quickly, spitting out the syllables. It was a masterful act. It was a beautiful deception. The lie was so carefully, wondrously crafted that her mother faltered in shock, mouth opening uselessly just long enough for Robb to stride out of the keep and into their conversation. Mother, he said cheerfully, though it was obvious to anyone with eyes that he wasn't anywhere near so happy as he sounded. What's going on? Who are these men? Knights of the Vale, she replied, still looking shell-shocked. In a startling breach of courtesy, she didn't introduce either of them to the other, nor look away from Peter. What did you mean? She asked instead. Peter, you said you saw their bodies. Mother, Robb said again, this time cutting her off and lifting his chin to meet Peter's cold gaze. A pleasure to meet you, he said, sounding anything but. Jon slid beside Sansa then, and his hand on her shoulder slowed the racing of her heart slightly. I told Robb that Peter wasn't to be trusted, he whispered into her ear. Good, Sansa whispered back. God's above Jon. He thinks that Father and I are dead. He thinks he can control Mother through that. I don't. She cut herself off when Peter started to speak. My apologies, Peter said, sinking into a bill once more, this time noticeably shallower. Lord Robb, I regret to inform you of the deaths of your sister and father. Robb faltered for a half-beat. The courtyard watched him closely to see what he would choose to do to follow his lead. He drew in his breath, shallowly, and then straightened to his full height. That news could have been sent by Raven, and much faster, Robb replied flatly. Now tell me what you're doing in my lands and in my castle, Peter, before I toss you out. Robb, their mother snapped, but Robb didn't react to her censure. Peter took offense at that. Caitlin, is this the respect your sons have for you? This is the respect I have for men that enter my keep and refuse to tell me why, Robb shot back stiffly. Why are you here, and what do you want? You do not even feel anything for the deaths of your kin? The rumors are indeed true. There is no warmth in the blood of Starks. Enough, their mother said, trying to step between them. Robb, this is an old friend of mine from Riverrun, Peter Baelish. He married your Aunt Lisa. Robb was barely paying attention to her, it seemed, for he didn't spare her a glance nor allow her to finish. I will weep for their deaths when I wish, he bit out. I will mourn, but this is not that time. And for all that, it is not your right to advise me or take me to task. I ask you for the third and last time, Lord Baelish of the Vale, why are you here, and what do you want? Mother. He wants mother. It is all he wanted, all his life. I come to offer condolences on the deaths of your sister and father, Peter said slowly. He looked slightly shaken, Sansa thought. Shaken and startled against the unshaken confidence of Robb, who was just a boy. Good. I come to pledge the strength of the Vale against King's Landing and the Lannisters. We have bonds of blood tied to Caitlin, and will honor them. Do you? With only 15 men beside you? Robb, their mother hissed once more. He must have gathered some wits about him, because he didn't look half as angry as before. Just a minute, mother, he said quietly. Louder. And what do you ask for in return, Lord Baelish? Peter pulled himself together quickly, snapping up walls and deflections with ease that Sansa might not have recognized if she hadn't known him so well. To win the hearts of my men, I shall need your mother to come with me to the Vale for some time. He shot her a slightly wary look and then turned on Robb angrily. I wouldn't wish to have said such things so plainly. Your mother is already distraught, Lord Robb. She does not need to know all these details immediately. God save us. You shall address me as Lord Stark, Robb said coldly. And she is my mother, Lord Baelish. You have not seen her in decades. I know precisely what she wants and needs to know. He inhaled sharply shortly, holding up a hand to still Peter's response. As to your request to bring my mother to the Vale, it is dismissed. So long as they keep their neutrality, there shall be no need for their assistance. A perfunctory bow, and he finished with grim politeness. I thank you for your condolences and bid you good day on your journey back to the Vale. This isn't going to end well. Peter choked on his rage. Sansa could see the fury in his eyes, the way his hand clenched and his knuckles whitened. You are a fool, boy, he spat. I offer you the best warriors in the 7 kingdoms. And you turn us away because, what? You. I have to act. Sansa exhaled sharply, reached for her hood, threw it back and stepped forward. Jon caught her arm, but she threw him off easily. If there is a fool in Winterfell, Lord Baelish, it is yourself, she said, cold and level and cutting as a winter wind. Peter startled, and Robb stiffened, and Sansa lifted her chin firmly, not trembling even a bit. You tell my mother and brother that Sansa and Eddard Stark are dead, and yet here we stand, hale and healthy. You bring Knights of the Vale, you say, but their banners are painted on and the paint is cracking. Do you recognize me, Lord Baelish? You ought to have taken my brother's advice and left when he ordered you. Sansa glided forwards, and she felt unconquerable. She felt triumphant, She felt as frozen and unyielding as the wall itself. I know that when I begged Joffrey Lannister to give my father a maester's care, you said nothing. I know that when Cersei Lannister threatened me and then my father, you told her that we were to be feared. I know that you pushed the Kingsguard to question me as to the whereabouts of Jon and Arya when they disappeared. She had moved close enough that she could see the beat of his pulse against his neck. Joffrey Lannister is the product of incest, Sansa said softly. King Robert left no true-born heirs to Westeros. The North remembers Lord Baelish. We remember those who wronged us and those who hurt us in our hour of greatest need. You were my mother's friend, and all you wanted was both of us dead. And here came the biggest, most ambitious move she had ever made. If she carried it off, it meant freedom. If Sansa let her fears carry her, she consigned them all to a slow, laborious death. In the name of House Stark and the North, she said, raising her voice so all could hear, I, Sansa, eldest daughter of the Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, accuse you of treason against House Stark. Heart in her throat, she waved at the northern men standing warily in the courtyard, their hands on their swords, waiting for her to give them an excuse. Arrest him. Her mother and brother were gaping at her. Sansa gave Robb a long look and then turned and walked back into the keep. Are you mad? Robb demanded as he entered the room. Jon, behind him, shut the door quietly and leaned against it. Robb was angry. No, Robb was so past angry that he had no words for it. There is a difference between not trusting Baelish and arresting him, he shouted. Sansa didn't turn to look at him, and he felt his rage flare higher. You want war with the Vale? We're strong, that's true enough. But how many kingdoms do you want us to defeat before we can call ourselves at peace? How much blood, Sansa? How many lives? None, she shouted back suddenly, whirling around. I don't want us to go to war. I'd be thrilled to stay in Winterfell and maintain the North for the rest of our lives, but we can't, you know that. Robb threw his hands up. You say that and then go and arrest the husband of the Lady of the Vale. You say that and then you go and arrest him for treason in the name of House Stark. We haven't declared anything, nothing is clear, everyone's confused, and you've managed to stir a hornet's nest. Your actions don't quite match up with what you want, do they? Peter was the man who killed Jon Arryn, Sansa said coldly. He convinced Lisa to kill Jon with tears of bliss, and then he killed her too. He controls brothels and knows the secrets of 1,000 lords. He is the most dangerous man in the entirety of Westeros. She breathed in slowly and then seemed to relax a little. Give me a week, and I'll have proof of his murder. If you're smart, you can use him as a stepping stone to seceding and declaring independence. Robb inhaled, ready to continue shouting, but then he looked at her, actually looked. For all that Sansa stood tall and proud, her hands were shaking. Her eyes were purpling with bruises as if she'd knuckled away tears, and her cheeks looked raw as if scrubbed violently. He inhaled and then exhaled and let his anger drip away slowly. And what should I tell Mother in the meantime? Sansa appeared to sag a little at the sudden change in tone. She covered for it by sinking into a chair carefully and sitting with a stiff back, but there was a tired resignation that he could still identify. I don't know, she replied half miserably. She won't believe the truth, will she? She loves him, Robb said gently. Sansa tipped her head back. Robb could see, through the shadows, the pale gleam of tears in her eyes. I trusted him too, she said quietly, the weariness in her voice tugging at his heart. I trusted him, and he sold me to murderers and thieves. After I took back Winterfell with Jon, she nodded to Jon, who'd been standing so quietly for the whole conversation. He asked for my hand. I was going to accept, but then I remembered some things, and I looked it up, and I realized that he'd not only killed Aunt Lisa but also Jon Arryn, and then he was trying to kill Sweet Robin, and she deflated suddenly. Robb sagged too, and attention faded from the room easily enough. What was left was sadness and an old sort of grief. "I didn't kill him last time," Sansa said finally. "But he's done it in this world as well. In King's Landing, he was the man pushing for Father to be beheaded. And he's going to pay for it." "And what should I tell Mother?" Robb repeated. "Tell her the truth," Sansa told him. "It's all that we have anyway. And she knows that I know some things from the past." She paused. "No, wait. I'll tell her myself. I owe Mother this, at the least." Robb stepped forward and pressed a hand to her shoulder. "She missed you. When the Lannister pretender came, Mother wept for days, sure that you were dead. Don't think we aren't angry, Sansa, that he's playing on Mother's worst fears." "I'll tell her," she repeated, a hand over her eyes and face down. "Give me some time, Robb. I'm sorry, I didn't expect Littlefinger to come from nowhere. Things have changed." "Things changed because you and Father are safe," Robb said evenly. "I'm not angry about that. I'm not even too angry that you didn't tell me who and what Littlefinger is, because I know you haven't told me everything, but I do wish we had better planning. We have to be the ones acting, not reacting." "Letting him leave would have sent the wrong message," Sansa retorted. He sighed. "Aye, but this still rubs me the wrong way." Sansa relaxed slightly. Her eyes flicked from him to Jon, and then back again. After a moment, she lifted her chin and looked at him. It was a shadow of her normal, proud gaze, but it had Sansa's signature strength nonetheless. "I'll speak to Mother," she said. "You go and start interrogating those knights that Peter brought." Robb nodded and turned to leave. "Are you coming, Jon?" "No," Jon said after a beat. "You go on ahead. I think I need to talk to Sansa." The hard look in his eyes told Robb that, for all that the three of them held no secrets, he did not want to be in the room for the following conversation. Robb remembered the desolate look in Jon's eyes when he told him of Sansa's fears. He remembered the way Sansa turned almost unconsciously to face Jon, no matter where or when he entered a room. He remembered, above all, the love that the two of them held, and knew that they needed to talk to mend the fraying edges of their relationship. "I want to see you in the practice yard at dawn tomorrow," Robb told him, and meant, "Everything better be back to normal when I beat you up." By Jon's grimace, Robb thought he understood. Sansa wasn't sure how she got here. Intellectually, she was. She'd kept her griefs and tears from Jon for the months they spent on the road, and when she'd spoken to Robb and not him, that had hurt Jon quite badly. It had been festering for weeks, and she'd been trying to avoid speaking to him about it for just that long, and all that had ended with Robb leaving the room with a last, wary look back at the two of them, and Jon starting to demand explanations in a loud voice. It hadn't helped that Sansa hadn't been very receptive to him. They'd started shouting at each other only a couple of minutes back. It had started with Jon accusing her of being deliberately quiet on important issues. Then, Sansa had retorted with a jape about his inability to obey her orders that Jon hadn't found very funny, and, well, here they were. Here they were, 5 minutes, 100 shouted indictments, and so far from the source of the argument that Sansa did not know how they came here. Maybe it'd been because she called him a bastard, or because Jon told her that she was a spoiled idiot of a noble, or that their name-calling had dragged them away from the issue of Sansa not telling Jon that she had nightmares, and instead taken them to Sansa not telling Jon anything. And so, here they were. "Who was my mother?" Jon barked. "Tell me true, Sansa. Tell me who the woman who managed to seduce our father from his vows to your mother was. Tell me." "I would," Sansa shot back, knowing her face was an unattractive shade of red, and that she was screeching, "But you're not exactly letting me, are you? You were the one who said I don't want to know." "Because it isn't something you can unhear." "That's shameful, is it?" Jon asked coldly. Sansa breathed in sharply and kept calm by the skin of her teeth. "No. But it is painful." When you first told me that you'd come back, you said you could tell me who my mother was." Jon took a small, threatening step forward before he remembered and controlled himself. "It was why I believed you. Now it's been 9 years and Father still hasn't said he'd tell me, and I have a right to know, God damn you. Tell me." "Fine," Sansa snapped and stepped towards him. Jon stilled when she got close enough to touch. He didn't seem to breathe when Sansa pressed close enough to whisper in his ear. She hoped, viciously, that he asphyxiated himself before hearing this. Once, in the Godswood, all those years ago, Sansa had told him that she could tell him his mother's name. It had tipped the disbelief in Jon's eyes over to stark wanting, and then to unsteady hope. Almost a decade later, Jon demanded that she follow up on that promise. But Sansa knew very well what secrets like this could do in the hands of the unscrupulous. If someone wanted to hurt her family, this secret could very easily bring the wrath of 7 kingdoms down on their heads. Sansa would speak of Jon's deepest desire, but she would not do so loudly or lightly. "Your mother's name," she breathed into his ear, "is Lyanna Stark." And in the heartbeat before Jon stopped hearing what she said, she finished, "And your father is Rhaegar Targaryen." Jon shoved her away almost before she finished speaking. It was the first time he'd ever treated her with anything less than utmost decorum, and it made her want to weep as much as she wanted to clench her fists and rage. "Jon," she said as he strode to the door, yanking it open roughly. He looked back at her. His eyes were furious, and the aching shock pain in them almost made her flinch. "Don't talk to me," he bit out. "Don't look at me, cousin." And with that last word, spat as if it were a curse, Jon turned and left. "Gods above," Robb whispered, stepping out of the dungeons. He'd just finished questioning the 4th in a series of 15. Their stories all said the same thing: they'd been squires for Knights of the Vale. A few months previously, there was a sickness that killed off a large number of the knights, suspiciously killing only those who had opposed Littlefinger's marriage to Lady Arryn. In order to fill the gaps, the squires had been trained and knighted quickly. All that was suspect enough. But then came the news of how Littlefinger had met a girl on the way to Winterfell, a girl with north dark hair and striking blue eyes, and how he had killed her. Not in so many words, of course. But one of the men had seen blood streaking a tree trunk, and another had spoken of how Littlefinger had treated the girl with great familiarity, and a last had said that the guards escorting her had been disbanded the night that the 2 camps parted. When he sketched a portrait of the girl who had impersonated Sansa and showed it to them, all 3 confirmed it was her. Robb had been sure it was Lannisters that sent the imposter, but he hadn't been sure why. Now it seemed that Littlefinger had been the one to do it, all to test the waters. If Sansa and Father hadn't returned when they had, they might have trusted Littlefinger. Mother might have left Winterfell and gone to the Vale under his control. He was responsible for everything, Robb managed to say, and only just held back from retching at the thought. He was responsible for everything. Sansa washed her face, dried it, and cleaned it as if it were tear-stained, though she hadn't cried even once in the night following Jon's departure. She had several things to do, and whatever else had happened or changed, she owed it to Robb to act as if nothing had occurred. Sansa breathed deep and left her quarters, heading across the keep to her mother's. There were so many reasons to be nervous about this conversation. In another time, in another world, she wouldn't have been. But in this one, Sansa was nowhere near as close to her mother as she had been, once. She was prim and proper and a perfect lady still, but the desire for children and a husband and a love straight out of the songs didn't cling to her as it once had. Even more, she was a woman grown in mind if not body. Sansa had survived things her mother couldn't dream of even imagining. What comfort could her mother offer her when her dreams were full of white cloaks and red blood and betrayal? Yes, in another life, Sansa had been closest to her mother. She had adored her mother's beautiful hair, her mother's genteel, lovely gowns, her mother's southern dances and gods and beliefs. But when she accepted Jon as her sworn shield, and when she began spending more time plotting with Robb to have a better life, she had lost the innocent, sun-soaked, laughing memories of her mother that had once given her such strength. Lady Catelyn couldn't understand why her daughter had chosen to accept the boy who represented her disgrace. And even if she could understand, she couldn't accept it. In an old life, Sansa had loved her mother. She had been a girl raised by a mother to whom family and duty and honor were of utmost importance. And then Sansa's family had died, and her duty had been to obey and love the man who killed that family, and her honor, in the eyes of the world if not herself, had been stripped alongside the lashes she bore on her back. "I am not the girl you once raised and loved," Sansa thought sadly. "I am not the girl who wanted to be a queen. I am not the girl who saw golden princes and didn't see the corruption underneath. I am sorry for it. But I would not do anything different." She knocked lightly on the closed door in front of her, and hoped her mother would be able to forgive her for what she was going to do. "Mother?" came the soft voice from the doorway. Catelyn turned to see her daughter, framed in dawnlight and beautiful for it. Sansa had grown so much. There were times, especially after she told them of her life in another world, in another time, when Catelyn had wondered whether her daughter had died that night, that terrible night that still gave Catelyn nightmares sometimes. Guiltily, quietly, she had wondered if a stranger was wearing Sansa's skin, left behind to mock all that she had lost. But then there were times like this, where she looked weary and quiet and broken up, and all Catelyn could feel was a fierce, fierce love. In the hallway, illuminated by the brilliant light and dressed in a white gown, Sansa looked less like a real person and more like a goddess reborn, all pale skin and sunrise hair and sharp, ethereal features. Seeing her, Catelyn could almost forget that she was furious. "Sansa," she said, waving her in, "did you need something?" "I wanted to talk to you." She hesitated and then seated herself on the chair. "Is father going to be in soon?" "Do you want him to be?" Sansa shook her head. "I want to talk to you first. Robb told him about Peter yesterday. But I think, well, he was your friend before anything else." "He is my friend," Catelyn said levelly. "I know." Sansa hesitated. "But he is not just that, not any longer. I would not accuse him of crimes committed in another world, in another time. Only those done here, and those are numerous. And I'm supposed to be grateful that you don't accuse him of crimes that live only in your head?" "Like what?" she demanded. "He convinced Aunt Lisa to poison her husband," Sansa said quietly. "Robb said that he's pretty sure that he killed a large number of Vale Knights who didn't like his marriage to Aunt Lisa, and that he killed the Lannister pretender who came to Winterfell. One of those alone would have been enough to convict him. We have all three." Catelyn rose to her feet and started pacing. "Do you have evidence of any of this?" "I have confidence in it," she replied, "and I'll get the evidence. Don't doubt it." "You're asking me to trust you," Catelyn said sharply. "A 15-year-old girl, against the strength of my years with Peter. And you don't even have a reason for imprisoning him." "Sansa." Her daughter swallowed hard and then straightened until she was as cold and stiff as a blade. There was no emotion in her eyes, only an emptiness that reminded Catelyn of the ice fields of the Gift, empty and desolate and freezing, and yet hard, unbroken. A fierce sort of beauty, if it didn't kill you first. "I love you. I've always loved you. You and I, Mother, we were the ones who weren't of the North. Once I loved you, dearest of all those here. I wish to become you." Her eyes remained level on Catelyn's, and not a single muscle shifted in her beautiful face. "You raised me to be dutiful, to be honorable, to love my family. I learned that there is no higher duty, no higher honor, than caring for that family. I know you trust Peter, but he is a monster and a death dealer, and I will see him dead for it." "Will he have a trial then?" Catelyn asked coldly. "Or will you murder him for unknown sins in the backyard gullies of Wintertown?" Sansa rose to her feet as well. "I will send a raven tonight to Lady Arryn," she said. "I will pretend to be Peter and ask for some clarification on the poison she used. Once we get her confession, we shall call our banners. I will have Littlefinger convicted in front of all the North, and when Robb takes his head, not a single soul shall call it vengeance. And what will happen to Lisa, if she is complicit in this murder?" "On my word as a Stark," Sansa said, soft as a raven's feathers, "she will survive this. I wish to assure you of that." And she breathed in, and all her softness disappeared behind another, taller mask of ice. "And I wish to apologize, for you once loved Peter, loved him still, perhaps, and this is going to hurt you. I am sorry for that. But only for that. Nothing more." Catelyn knew she was trembling, knew her rage was potent and freezing, knew that she had never been so angry at one of her children in all her life. "For my love of him, you offer condolences. Not for the dignity he is due as a man, as a lord." Sansa's face suddenly cracked open, all her calm reserve gone in favor of her own fury. "He stood beside Cersei Lannister while she questioned me as to where Jon and Arya had disappeared. He told her that father and I were traitors, and that traitors deserve traitors' deaths. He wanted me and father dead, and you stand there and defend him?" "What? But he said—" "He sent a raven," Catelyn heard herself say numbly. "After you told Robb that your father had been captured. Peter said he would try to protect you." "He did his level best to kill us," Sansa said flatly. She flinched at the words and then retreated to the desk, seating herself, searching for some sort of composure. When she felt she might not weep or scream or curse herself, she looked up at Sansa. "You are my eldest daughter, and are as a stranger to me. Who are you?" "I do not know." "I feel like weeping, Sansa, when I see your eyes. They are mine in color and shape, but they are so much colder than mine has ever been. And you were so young now, yes, but when you died in another world as well." "Oh, my poor, sweet, darling one. What did they do to you?" "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. "What did Peter do to you, Sansa?" "Not in this world, no. In your other one. What did he do that you hate him so?" Sansa shook her head. "There are things you don't want to know. Things that will only hurt you. I told you that I came back in time, and if I tell you all how I was hurt, you will not be able to sleep through the night." She smiled, gently, patronizingly. "Just know." Catelyn arched an eyebrow and sent her a look that she had perfected for Arya when she was being particularly irritating, or Bran when he was doing terrifying maneuvers, or even Rickon when he would not listen to any of the maesters. "You will listen," it said, "or you will face consequences." Sansa's mouth snapped shut. Catelyn hid a smile and kept her eyes narrowed on her daughter. "I am your mother," she said, and it was not sharp or angry or loud, just imperious. Just demanding. "I deserve to know what happened. You faced it, Sansa. I can bear listening to what you endured." "It is not a happy story," Sansa said, almost desperately. "Mother." "Tell me," she said, and it was iron, it was steel, it was a Tully's honor and a Stark's ice and a mother's worry. Sansa bowed her head, red silk strands sliding over her pale face, and she began to speak. "Do you know what it does to girls, doing to them what you did to me? You tried to break me. You thought me an ivory chess piece, a fainting doll, a deadened specter. You thought that I would be as easily defeated as those who came before me. But I am a wolf. I know what it is to be a queen uncrowned, and a brotherless sister and a deathful wife. My pack died, and in their lifeblood I was baptized. I am a wolf, and I will tear your throat out before you ever see my claws." Sansa faced the shadow of Littlefinger and thought, You will learn to fear me." He tried to break me to become you, she told her mother. He tried and he failed. I am no ghost. I am a vengeful woman, and he will fear my wrath. It was hours later, or perhaps it only felt so long, but a knock came on the door and Sansa realized her throat was dry. When she looked outside, the sun had risen and it was likely almost noon. Come in, she called. Robb stuck his head in. He wore simple armor, and his red hair was mussed and sweaty. His eyes narrowed on their mother's tear-stained face, and then Sansa's own exhausted mien, and he opened his mouth, likely to ask what had happened. Sansa shook her head once, sharply, almost violently. Don't you dare, you arse. Not now. He frowned but controlled himself. Do you know where Jon is? No, Sansa said. We fought yesterday. He was quite angry when he left. She felt her lips twist gracelessly. If I had to guess a place, though, probably Wintertown. Wintertown? Robb asked. But he never. He paused, taking in her slightly shaking hands and red-scrubbed eyes, and shook his head. What did you tell him that was so irritating? Their mother sighed. I believe I am needed in the kitchens, she said. Sansa, I know that there are things you haven't told me. I don't need, nor want to hear it all. But if you wish to speak to me, I shall always be here. Do you understand? Of course. I should have told you earlier, I think. She'd been afraid that her mother would see what had happened to her as a mark of weakness. Of uncleanliness, perhaps. Sansa could defend herself against such accusations easily, and on an intellectual level, she understood that she was blameless, but had her mother so much as looked at her with the slightest hint of disgust, she knew that a small, secret part of her would have been shattered. But there hadn't been disgust. Horror and anger, yes, twined together, but underneath it all, love. Only love. It had healed things inside Sansa she hadn't known needed healing. I'll come to you if there's anything else, Sansa told her softly. Her mother nodded and left the room quickly. Robb looked between them and then shook the questions off visibly. She turned to face him fully and reached forward, catching one hand in both of hers. If Roderick finds Jon, tell me. He deserves to hear an apology. And don't tease him about this. It's not kind. What he asked, how I answered, we are both in the wrong. And I need to talk to him about this. So, don't interfere? Robb nodded. I can do that easily enough. He smirked. Jon told me about the same thing. Our problems are our own. Don't you worry about it. Sansa offered him a faint smile. I know how much you enjoy going after things with a sword. I also know how much you don't like sitting still. Don't worry, everything will be back to normal soon enough. Between Jon and me, of course, but then you'll be a king soon too. She arched an eyebrow. The southern armies will learn to fear us. His smile grew. Winter is coming, Sansa, haven't you heard? Winter is coming, Sansa agreed, and her grin was full of teeth. But we are the Starks, and we will survive. A few years ago, Theon Greyjoy had started visiting Wintertown. It had been the beginning of a nightly adventure for both Roderick and Jory. Usually, Theon only drank and wallowed in the brothel if he had enough money, but then there were the nights when he tried to start fights or when he insulted some high-flying peasant. Those Roderick dragged him out without any thought to his dignity. And then Robb had followed him. After that, it had been Jon. At some time, Roderick had started to bribe the guard at the gate so he could know when he had to head down to Wintertown and bring the idiotic boys back before they could get gutted by some back-alley orphan with large eyes and an empty belly. But for all that, the times he'd had to bring Jon Snow back from Wintertown could be counted on one hand. He'd made mistakes, just the same as Robb, but had always been more reserved. He tended less towards a blind haze that the unfavored and more towards the fine balance between happiness and shakiness that meant it wasn't obvious that he was drunk. Which was why this was startling, to say the least. Robb had sent him to find and bring Jon back to Winterfell. Roderick had laughed then to think that he'd find him trying to drink away his sorrows, but find him he did, sequestered at a corner table, head down on the table and a teetering pile of tankards around him. Glared at anyone coming close, the innkeeper said, shrugging. Didn't start any fights last night though, so we didn't stop him. Roderick nodded and shouldered his way forward, leaning down and hoisting him up an arm over Roderick's shoulder, the other scrabbling weakly at the wooden grain. On the way back to Winterfell, he only threw up once. For how much he had drunk, Roderick decided he was impressed. For a boy of less than 20 years to hold his ale so well was nothing less than admirable. By the time they'd entered the keep, he had started drooping. Almost his entire weight was leaning on Roderick's shoulders. Roderick sighed and took him to the boys' chambers in the keep. A number of servants brought lemon water and a wool cloth to clean him up. Roderick had just finished getting his jerkin off, which was caked with vomit and dried wine, when Lady Sansa entered the room. She swept in haughtily, red hair glittering like a beacon, and all movement in the room halted when they noticed her. She didn't look at Roderick or any of the servants, focused almost entirely on Jon. "Is he all right?" she asked, inflectionless, still not looking up. "Aye," Roderick responded. "He'll sleep for some time yet, but then he doesn't need any of you." It wasn't a question, but he treated it as one. "Aye." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "Then," she said, imperious as her lady mother, "get out." Roderick gaped at her. Lady Sansa was always a lady. Unfailingly polite, sweet-tempered to even the worst-behaved squires, never even touching at impropriety. But this was the height of misconduct. And she leveled a look at him that would have ice. In that moment, she looked twice as scary as her father at his angriest, twice as terrifying as her mother in a temper. "All cool," honed contempt. "Did you not hear me, Sir Roderick?" "'Tis highly improper," he protested. Sansa waved a hand. "Tell my mother if it so pleases you." Until then, her face shifted into a mask that made her look like a dire wolf. "Get out." Roderick swallowed and left. Jon awoke to a fall of red hair and a pounding head. His groan resounded in the empty room as he shut his eyes again. Sansa, for whom else could have hair that long, that red, bent over him when he did so, close enough that he could feel her breath against his lips. Before he could startle, however, she retreated. He relaxed minutely against the bed. And then she threw water on him. Jon lurched upright, sputtering, just in time to see her set aside the basin. "What the fuck?" he asked, teeth chattering. "You called me an idiotic noble girl," she said evenly. "I was angry. You and Robb have been telling me to express my emotions, haven't you?" Jon searched for something to wrap around himself. When he couldn't find it, he straightened his spine and glared at her through an aching head. You shouted enough right then and there, didn't you?" His teeth clacked together against his will. Vainly Jon reached for some tattered shreds of dignity. "No need to become vindictive." Her lips twitched. "You're finding this funny," he accused. "A little, yes," she murmured. "Oh, so it isn't enough to pity the poor bastard who didn't even know his own parents' names, parents being multiple, you have to throw water on him?" Sansa checked herself at that, hands stilling from picking at the frayed edges of his blanket and instead looking straight at him, blue eyes flecked with some emotion he couldn't name. "I've never pitied you," she told him, and her tone was not as sharp as he expected. "Not in all my life. I didn't love you once, but pity? Oh, you were too proud for that by half." Jon looked at her, stunned. "I'm too proud?" "Yes." Her hands folded neatly together in her lap, Too proud and too idiotic. Suddenly, he was furious. Tell me what I've got to be proud of, Jon bit out. Turns out my father was a rapist son of a man who liked to burn people alive. Turns out I'm a Targaryen. It's madness that runs in my blood, Sansa, not honor. Tell me what I've got to be proud of. Sansa's eyes shuddered. When he paused for breath, she asked coldly, Are you finished? Aye, he grunted. For now. Then hear this, she announced. Hear this, Jon, you are a Stark. When Rhaegar Targaryen lay with Lyanna Stark, the babe was born with gray eyes and black hair and not a hint of silver and purple. 2 houses' blood warred inside of you, and 'twas Stark blood that won. 'Twas Lyanna Stark's blood that ran true, and gave you a face and a nature more Stark than any of Eddard Stark's trueborn children. Jon felt his rage fade. The way Sansa looked at him, all faith, all belief, all sheer, beautiful trust, it sank into his ribs and warmed him as the best ale couldn't have. When Sansa whispered those names into his ear, he had felt like there was a pit in his stomach, yawing and baying for something to fill it, and he tried to fill it with drink and numbness, but it hadn't worked. Clearly it hadn't, for here they were, him in a damp shirt, the faint smell of lemons all around them, and Sansa offering him the first thing that managed to fill the hole. Thank you, he managed. Sansa nodded once decisively, and rose to leave, he thought. His breath rattled in his lungs and he wanted, abruptly, desperately, for her to remain. A week ago, he might not have thought overmuch of asking it of her. But there had been something in the dim light of the Red Keep, and something more in the cave where he'd stumbled upon her. And then they were in Winterfell, and all Jon could remember was the aching, ballooning hurt when Robb, Vivs had told him that Sansa couldn't sleep, and well, he didn't know if they were able to go back to what they had been before they left Winterfell. More to the point, he didn't know if he even wanted that. And she was at the door, almost opening it. Why didn't you tell me? The words burst out of him, like punches. He flinched, waiting for her to start yelling as before, or worse, sneering, but instead she only stilled. When she turned around, there was only sadness in her face. About the nightmares? About everything. Sansa seated herself again, staring intently at her lap. After a long pause, she began. I killed Elin Payne, she said, almost soundlessly. I was so frightened I'd killed a man before, yes, but never with my own hands. And if I stopped to think about it or consider, I started shaking. We couldn't afford those first few nights. We had to move so fast, so quietly, so I just tried to stop thinking about it. I was so tired by the time we slept anyway that I didn't even dream. Slowly, as if in a dream, as if his hand belonged to another, Jon reached out and caught her fingers in his. And then father was ill, she continued. I was worried about him, I was terrified for Arya. The Lannisters were still on our heels, and I couldn't, Jon, I could hardly think straight, much less consider telling you, because if I sat down and tried to handle everything, I'd break. And we didn't have time for it. Jon shook his head. We'll always have time for things like that, Sansa. First blood is difficult. It's hard to handle even for trained men. I'm not so much a shrinking violet as Robb thinks, Sansa interrupted. And that was Sansa at her sharpest, at her loveliest, all smooth-edged sapphire, but the edge honed enough to cut if you weren't wary. I've been responsible for death before. It's never been easy, no, but this isn't my first, I promise you. But you're still hurting. Over everything. The Lannisters. Being back in the Red Keep. Being forced to beg for father's life again. Everything. Not just Elin Payne, I assure you. He felt the corners of his lips twitch upwards. So it was a lack of time at first that you didn't tell me. Then I didn't want to handle it, she shrugged. I couldn't sleep, but there was so much else to think on, and it just didn't happen. I thought I was dealing. But you weren't, he murmured. Sansa, amazingly, managed to look amused. I didn't know that until we were in Winterfell, and even here I couldn't sleep. The first person I saw after that was Robb. She sighed and flipped their palms so she could trace a hand over the veins on the back of his palm. It sent a shiver down his spine. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, soft and honest. Jon swallowed. Thank you. I mean it, you know. Her eyes darted up to meet his, and then back to their joined hands once more. You were not a Targaryen. You're of the North. You always will be. Father always loved you. Father loves you. Robb and Arya and Bran, they've always loved you. They always will, no matter who your father was. Because they know you, and that's what matters. Mayhaps he was still drunk. Mayhaps he was a Targaryen yet, in truth, and all that was needed to make that heritage of his rise to the surface was his knowledge of it. Jon wasn't sure what madness had overtaken him, only that something had. And you? He asked, quiet and daring and pointed as he could manage. Sansa stilled. Her hair spilled over her shoulder like a fall of flame. It hid her face from him easily. Jon wanted to take the words back immediately, feeling like a fool and worse. He wanted to go back in time and sew his lips shut with Sansa's thickest needle. But then she shifted and he could see her face once more. Her cheeks were red. Her eyes, blue and beautiful, were averted. But then she looked up at him, and the fire in them could have melted all the frozen fields beyond the wall. Heat bloomed in his gut like ink spreading through water. Sansa? He whispered. She was trembling. Her hands twitched on his damp coverlet and began to move upwards, barely brushing his arm and then skimming past his neck, fingers trailing over the thin skin over his pulse point. He could feel the way they shook minutely against it. She cupped his jaw, then, and her eyes hadn't shifted away from his, not once. They were full of something Jon had never before seen in them. It took less than the gentlest press of her hand to make Jon shift forward. Their lips met, and everything seemed to fade into the background. His damp skin, the bitter taste at the back of his throat, the sharp scent of lemons. Sansa tasted of summer apples and something colder, cleaner. Jon arched his neck, freeing his other hand to tangle in her hair and bring her closer. She gasped into his mouth at the new angle, leaning closer and deepening it. And then her knees slipped off the coverlet, and she tumbled straight to the floor. Jon scrambled to get the sheets off him quickly, half panicking. Before he could, though, Sansa had started laughing, head thrown back, a low rolling sound that he hadn't ever heard before. Looking up at him through her lashes, she said, still snorting, "Gods, I thought I was unpracticed." "Don't be mean," Jon replied grumpily. He couldn't help the way his lips twitched, though. "No?" And suddenly, she was standing, and God's Jon knew he might regret it in the morning, but at the moment he knew he'd never been so breathlessly, hopelessly addled as when she looked at him so steadily, so heatedly. "I suppose I have to make it up to you, don't I?" Jon reached out and tried to kick his feet free of the coverlet. The only thing that happened was that he got more hopelessly twisted in them. She smiled at him then, eyes glittering with amusement, so sweetly he was sure he'd combust on the spot. Leaning down, winding arms around his neck and pressing close, she whispered in his ear, "I love you. I'll always love you, Jon. Bastard and Targaryen and all." "Don't ruin it," Jon managed to say. "No?" she asked, and he felt a laugh bubble through his chest as well. His eyes fell on the basin beside him. It was still half full of water, and Sansa was stepping closer, and... oh, damn it all to hell. Jon moved as quickly as he could, under her arm and bracing himself on the table. He took the basin and, in one smooth motion, threw it straight into her face. "What the..." she began. Her hair was plastered to her face, and she never looked so gloriously angry than in that precise moment. Payback, he said, barely able to speak through his breathless laughter. I'll show you payback, she snapped, wringing her braid angrily. Jon only laughed harder. 'Twas you that called me a proud idiot, he gasped out. Sansa tried to cloud him and tug on her braids simultaneously. Jon grinned up at her, shamelessly holding onto her hand, and it took scarce a few seconds for his glee to break her stern mask. Soon enough they were both laughing, and Sansa bent over him and shaking. Gods above, Jon thought, awed and deliriously, incredibly happy, reaching forwards and winding his finger through a stray red curl. Gods above, I love her. I love her.